We have officially left Egghead, which means that it is time for a summary video. So when we left Wano, I did a summary video in the form of sock puppets. It took a very long time and it was exhausting, but fun, and I enjoyed it. I was not going to do it again, though. So when Egghead started to come to a close, I was kind of thinking, what could I do? And I decided to just lean into my latest obsession. Let's go Lego. So this is a summary video of all the major events that happened on Egghead Island in Legos. So the arc begins when a warm eddy spits out a child and a shark tries to eat the Straw Hats. The Straw Hats do get separated into two separate groups where they do meet different Vegapunks, and we also see that one of the Vegapunks, Shaka the Good, makes a call to Dragon letting him know, I'm gonna die soon. But the most important thing is that each group enters Egghead Island, a future island where all the technology is seemingly extremely advanced, and naturally, right away, the Straw Hats begin exploring. First off, the Straw Hat group with Sanji, Frankie, Usopp, Nami, and Robin are all led into a trap where they have to be introduced to and fight a Seraphim. They enter into an explosive fight while the Vegapunks look on. Finally, Shaka stops the fight before it goes too far and explains to the Straw Hats that this futuristic island is actually modeled after a kingdom that once existed 900 years ago, and that the Void Century is the history of a war between an extremely advanced civilization of the past and the 20 kingdoms that later developed the world government. He explained that after the 20 kingdoms lost the war, they wiped out the ancient civilization so that its ideals could never be passed down. But the scholars of Ohara's research wasn't actually destroyed like we thought. Their research was thrown into the lakes to be preserved, to be protected from the fire. So the Buster Call came down and destroyed the island, but ultimately Ohara won. This is where we learn about Vegapunk's dreams to create the internet, as well as to provide free energy for all. This is also where we learn that the Iron Giant climbed up Mary Joa 200 years ago. We don't know why, but we do know that it was correlated around the same time as when the prejudice against fishmen started, or at least around the time where it became a real issue. And the reason the Iron Giant didn't complete its mission is because it ran out of energy. So because Vegapunk learned from a letter that he is about to die, he asked Luffy to take him off of the island. Elsewhere in the world, Blackbeard and Law have fought. Did not go well for Law. Also, Blackbeard captured Pudding, and CP0 has been dispatched to kill an old fart. So Vegapunk split himself into 6 satellites. I'll use Vegapunk's words to describe them. Each of them is an expert in one of my necessary facets. All 6 of them together possess one complete copy of my personality, but they can do 6 times as much. Naturally, Atlas attacks first, and Lucci goes Leopard to break her face. So Luffy goes Sun God and laughs in Leopard's face. Vegapunk rushes up to the control tower to watch the fight, where he says Luffy looks just like a god, the warrior of liberation, and that devil fruits are brought into this world with hope. Those with powers exist in different dimensions, dreamed up by someone else before them. With that, Vegapunk guilt trips Sentomaru into leading the Seraphim to attack CP0, which leads to a power struggle for the ability to command the strongest beings in the world. Meanwhile, Kuma, who has been rescued by the Revolutionary Army, gets up and starts running away from them. He travels, but hits the red line. He realizes he can't get to Egghead with a barrier in his way, so he starts climbing. The Navy too has been dispatched to go to Egghead and handle this situation, and Lucci has been ordered, do not attack the Straw Hats. He says that's stupid and he follows his own rules. And then an announcement sounds. Lapafay's defense system, Frontier Dome, deactivated. They're now vulnerable, and no one is in the control room. Bonnie, too, attacks Vegapunk, and then enters the room that contains Kuma's memories, his pain. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, Weevil, Whitebeard's alleged son, has defended his hometown, and Old Lady Stussy is sad. Sentomaru accepts his new role as a traitor against the world government. You know, the people who kill traitors without hesitation. And he sends the Pacifistas to attack the Navy. Meanwhile, Morgans reports, Straw Hat Luffy, Emperor of the Sea, wages all-out war with the Navy at Egghead, holding Vegapunk hostage. Vivi is unimpressed. So the old man goes missing. Bonnie is knocked out of Kuma's memory, and we realize that there is a traitor among us. Someone is picking off the Vegapunks and breaking the cameras so they can't be traced. And they're starting with Pythagoras. So now that we know that there's a killer in the lab, naturally, we split up. Lilith's crew finds Pythagoras, but then S-Snake blows them up and stomps on Pythagoras' head. Nami and Sanji's group fight S-Shark, and Lucci and Kaku offer to team up with the Straw Hats. They don't like that. But they do team up, and nothing seems to be working. That is, until Intel Extraordinaire cracks the code. The Seraphim are like king. While they fight, Shaka realizes where Vegapunk might be and goes after him. But once he arrives, the traitor is there too. Meanwhile, Kid arrives on Elbaf and gets completely obliterated by Shanks. And Garp and crew go after Kobe on Blackbeard's island. Garp comes flying in from above and levels the place all for his protege. Oh, such a good scene. And Buggy is successfully taking names, creating a robust crew, having the coolest pirate ship ever made, and leading his crew to find the One Piece. And finally, Cobra gets an audience with the Five Elders, where he reminds them of history, and that Alabasta didn't fall in line with what the 20 Kingdoms did, but that Lily never came home. He demands to know what the D is, but at the mention of Lily, Emu decides to sit on the empty throne in front of him. Bad day for Cobra. But we did learn that the D is the name of those who once opposed the rulers, and that Lily is the one that scattered the poneglyphs across the world. And Sabo heard it all. So the great Emu decided it's time to test the Mother Flame, taken from Vegapunk. The island they destroy will be Lulicia. Why? Because it's close. Worldwide flooding occurred as the sea level rose by 1 meter. Then Emu requested that Vivi be brought to him. Meanwhile, Garp and Kuzan fight. Garp trained to be the beast he is today by punching battleships with no haki, and Kuzan was the one that trained under him. Garp sincerely believes in the next generation and in passing on the mantle to them. So, in present day, when someone shows themselves to be in danger, Kobe does exactly what he did in the flashback. He sacrifices himself for other people. And Garp does exactly what he did in the flashback too. He sacrifices himself for the next generation and trusts them to finish it. So Garp creates an opening for them, Kobe takes it. Prince creates a web so that people don't die in the debris, and Garp is captured and terribly, terribly injured. And he laughs because he believes in them to be the future of the Navy. I know I was a little bit indulgent in my summary of this scene, but it's one of my favorite scenes in the arc. Back to Egghead. While we were visiting Ark, the Straw Hats captured York and demanded a ransom. Saturn agrees, so Kizaru enters Egghead and attacks his old friend, while Lucci attacks Vegapunk and hits his old friend. Everyone else may be afraid of having an admiral against them, but Luffy sees Kizaru and hits first. So Luffy attacks Kizaru and asks him, "Why do you want to kill the Apple Man?" Kizaru blasts himself away and says, "I don't want to kill him. I've known Vegapunk for a long time." What? And then Kizaru materializes next to him again, because light powers are cool, and kicks Luffy through a robot and out of frame. Then he turns to Bonnie and says, "I don't want to hurt you either," and then kicks her out of frame. Giant Gear 5 Luffy then comes back into frame to grab a hold of Kizaru and throw him for once. Meanwhile, Akainu has been sent to confront Kuma. Since they can't control Kuma anymore, it's time to eliminate him. He attacks, and Kuma is injured, but he's able to paw himself away and finally get to Egghead. Kizaru splits himself into light particles and appears back in front of Luffy as a dozen Kizarus, so Luffy lines them up and Dawn stamps them all. Well, all except the real one, and that one is choking Usopp. And Zoro fights a leopard. So Atlas successfully changes the commands of the Pacifistas, and Sanji saves Bonnie. And then the Pacifistas stop obeying, and a creature is summoned. And sweet Bonnie tearfully stabs Saturn in the chest. So up to this point, the parts of the story that are taking place on Egghead, I've done through Lego stop motion. And when we zoom out and look at the wider world, I talk about it here. But we're about to enter Kuma's flashback. So for this part, I'm gonna let the panels do the talking because I don't want to make a joke of it. 47 years ago, Kuma was born into a loving family, but because his father was of the buccaneer race, he and his family were enslaved and abused, but they held on to each other. Before they were enslaved, Kuma's parents ran a church, and they passed down that faith to Kuma and the hope that they held on to, the sun god Nika, a legendary warrior who will one day show up smiling and laughing and bring freedom. Kuma lost his mom, and then his dad was killed right in front of him. And then he was hunted for sport, a target put on his back for some sick game of the elite. But thanks to two other captives, the leader Ivankov and the strategizer/hacker Ginny, they worked together with the heart of the group, Kuma, to get them out. They use the distraction of the God Valley incident and get the prizes, 2 devil fruits. Kuma eats one while cheered on by Ivankov and is stopped by Saturn, who tried to tell him that history itself had already decided his fate for him. But Kuma rejected the notion that some should be born important and others born to be a slave, and chose to live his life like the one he had put his hope in. They saved 500 people that day, and Kuma grew up in his family's church, continuing to help as many people as he could and taking on their pain himself. He loved Ginny, but wouldn't marry her because he didn't want his family to suffer the way he did. But when the king of Sorbet Kingdom started turning those in the south into slaves, Kuma wasn't content anymore just to take away people's pain. He fought for their freedom with the help of his friends. Ginny was captured to be sexually enslaved by a celestial dragon. She was experimented on and then discarded after 2 years. She became extremely vulnerable to the sun, but chose to deplete her final days by traveling by daylight and exposing herself to the sun in order to give her daughter her best chance at life. She called Kuma to tell him one last time that she loved him, which he didn't hear, and then left her child with the man she knew without a doubt would love her unconditionally. Kuma raised that child with all the love a father can give, and taught her about Nika, and all the while fought for those weaker than him, even to the point of a solo revolution against the kingdom's dictator, using the hands of liberation to bring freedom to his people. And when Bonnie started to develop the same disease her mom had, he traveled the world to find her a cure. What he found was Vegapunk, who offered to cover the extreme cost of healing her by generating new stem cells and transplanting them. In exchange, Kuma had to agree to donate blood and have clones made of him and given to the Navy to defend the populace. But the elders stepped in and made their own requirements. 1. Kuma becomes a warlord of the sea. 2. Kuma must become a human weapon for the Navy. And 3. Kuma must abandon his mind and free will. His requests were horrible and inhumane, but for his daughter, Kuma gladly accepted. Kuma got the gift of 6 more months with his daughter before dropping her back off at the church one last time. And that was the last she heard from him. When Bonnie was healed, she escaped from the witch, made sure her father would recognize her, and set sail to find him. Meanwhile, it was time for Kuma to fully surrender his free will, but not before asking Vegapunk to program him to protect the Straw Hat ship. He had been watching Luffy, and if there really was a hero that would bring great transformation to the sea, he thought it must be him. And with that, Kuma stopped running. But even in his last moments, he was thinking about her. I reread Kuma's entire flashback in one sitting one morning while preparing for this video, and if you have not done that, I strongly recommend that you do. In the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be making a video about specifically Kuma, analyzing his character, and just looking at how brilliantly his story has been told, one of the best in the series, just kind of like a tribute to Kuma. But until then, back to Egghead. Saturn tells her that he experimented on her mother. He gave her that devil fruit as an experiment as well. She started to lose her belief in a future that she had hoped for. But you can't program out a person's core instincts. Kuma came to protect his child. The spider regenerated and continued to attack, but the Straw Hats stood guard. While Atlas, Frankie, Kuma, and Bonnie took the vacuum rocket, well, it doesn't matter where they were going because Kizaru stopped them. So they hurtled through the sky while the Pacifistas lined up to attack. But Vegapunk had one last act of disobedience up his sleeve. He had programmed Bonnie as the highest hierarchy of command of the Pacifistas. So with word from her, the Pacifistas turned on the Navy and Vegapunk accepted his death. Kizaru turned to finish Kuma and Bonnie, but Gear 5th Luffy is back and ready to fight. And with that, for the first time and together, Kuma and Bonnie look upon the one that they have been waiting for. And the giants flood the island. Luffy teaches Bonnie how to punch a spider, and once again, Sanji plays the best defense of his life. Meanwhile, Devon and Van Augur touch a spider and collect a swamp. Personally, I think they could have killed the swamp, but Oda doesn't listen to me. There are more Spidey attacks, and Kizaru finally earns his paycheck and kills the old man. With that, the world's longest live stream in history begins. And a very long coffee ad begins. While the ad is playing, 4 more demons are summoned, and they pretty much just start leveling the place. So the giants team up with Luffy to fight some immortal yokai, and the giant starts walking as Vegapunk's message begins. I have committed 2 sins. Therefore, whether I am arrested or executed, I shall program this message to be broadcast when my heart stops beating. However, I want to make one thing very clear first. Whoever may have rendered their judgment unto me, I am not trying to convince you that their intent is evil. I will not apply the labels of good and evil at all, in fact, because I understand too little about him to begin with. What I am about to tell you is so preposterous, you might even burst into laughter. However, you all have the right to know. To make a long story short, the world as we know it will sink into the sea. Now, speaking of the near future for me, assuming that the sensors I built are functioning correctly, in the days after I record this message, there should be a most remarkable earthquake that strikes the entire planet. As a result of that, the sea should rise about 1 meter around the world, rendering some islands uninhabitable. Beaches around the world will be lost for good. If I'm wrong in this prediction, feel free to disregard the rest of this message. If this has happened, however, you should heed my words very carefully. This particular earthquake is not exactly what I would call a natural phenomenon. In my own way, I only hoped for peace, but this was the root of my first sin. I dreamt of a source of endless, eternal energy, and in my desire to push the world forward into the future, I flew too close to the sun. Allow me to explain just what it is that is happening in our world. From about 900 years ago to 800 years ago, a period of a century, there is a span of history that is completely and entirely blank. We call this the Void Century, because all records from this time were eliminated. The only means to know this lost piece of history is to find a message from the past in the form of poneglyphs scattered across the world and decipher its contents. However, the world government has made it a crime of the highest order to decipher the message of the poneglyphs. And despite being a member of the government myself, I broke this law. That was my second sin. Through the sheer tenacity of a group of excellent archaeologists, I inherited some texts and a number of poneglyphs, which I have deciphered and continued studying to the best of my ability. I regret none of this. History, you see, tells a story. In other words, what I know is an incomplete story of that 100-year void. It would be dishonest to fill the blanks with my own speculation, so I will leave you with the verified truth. The main character of this story was born into a kingdom with an impossibly advanced civilization 900 years ago, like the sun god Nika spoken of in Elbaf legend. He fought with a body that stretched and contracted. His name was Joy Boy, and he was the very first man on this sea to be called a pirate. I have only read from a handful of poneglyphs, but what I found there was a record of a breathtakingly vast war. Joy Boy's enemy was the world government of the present day. More accurately, it was the precursor to the world government, a provisional army put together by 20 kingdoms known as the Alliance. You might say that they had no other choice, so robust was Joy Boy's faction. Without knowing the spark that caused the war, I won't say who was right or wrong. I'll simply state that two competing ideologies came head to head. As I mentioned earlier, for its time, 900 years ago, the country of Joy Boy's birth was a startlingly advanced civilization, and the weapons that were used over the course of this 100-year conflict appear to be impossible to recreate with the latest modern science. Even I, a humble genius, cannot replicate it, and therein lies the problem. The Void Century came to a close with the defeat of Joy Boy, but not before leaving the vast, permanent scars of war across the face of the world. The world is made up of a series of islands, and sailing between them is difficult, and many people never experience anything but their own culture at home. But this shared understanding of the world does not necessarily apply to the world of 1,000 years ago, because a cataclysm occurred during the Void Century, causing the world to sink once before. We are currently living on the pieces of a continent that existed long ago. The world of a millennium ago now slumbers unseen at the bottom of the sea. In fact, one can assume that in the past, there were a number of continents we know nothing about. If the world were still the same as it was in the past, then the act of erasing 100 years of history would be simply unthinkable and impossible. However, it makes much more sense when you understand that the rise in sea level over that century was 200 meters. As for why the sea level rose so much during that century, it would be natural to assume the work of a sudden natural disaster, but I can state for a fact that this was a man-made disaster. If such a cataclysm were caused by natural forces, then the initial disaster would have spanned several centuries and inflicted slow but continual damage upon the world. But by any measurement, climatologically, geologically, environmental, and atmospheric science, this dramatic shift could not have happened within a single century. So, the cause is something else. And when I detected the rise in the worldwide sea levels the other day, I had my answer. I knew the case and confirmed its existence. The ancient weapons that sank the world into the sea 800 years ago still exist today and await the moment that they stir once again. In other words, the vast war that arose during the Void Century never came to an end. Sadly, I owe you all my deepest apologies, but I need you to understand why. I wanted to create the energy that would power the industry of the world to come. And though it is still incomplete, I have at least reached a practical stage of my life's work. The Mother Flame, a fire that never goes out. It is an energy source that will one day in the future enrich the lives of people all over the world. Unfortunately, one little piece of that flame has been stolen. The fault of this is entirely with me. Around 2 weeks after the theft of the flame, the sky over Lulicia shone with powerful light and the kingdom vanished without a trace, according to the reports. After that was when I observed the first signs of the worldwide earthquakes. As a scientist, and with utmost pride in its development, I can tell you this: nothing but the Mother Flame could have created so much energy. The flame that I created was used to activate an ancient weapon. I know nothing but who might have carried this out, but the results speak for themselves. My actions have led, directly or indirectly, to the loss of many human lives, a fact that weighs most deeply upon my soul. I am so sorry. I have inadvertently proven that the man-made disaster that once sank the world is possible again. In the past, there were 3 ancient weapons, and Joy Boy attempted to preserve them for the future. Why would he do that for such dangerous things? Have we not sunk far enough? Who is the true evil here? And who fights the good fight? The day will come when all of the answers are laid bare. And I warn you, that moment will happen when we reach the very precipice of the world's drowning. The Void Century is still ripe with the mystery. However, there are some who have learned the truth, the kind of the pirate's crew. When they learned all of the true history, why did they drift apart without telling anyone? Why didn't they act on it? I know this information is in bits and pieces, but if I were to say more, it would be speculation. Lastly, I have one final message to impart. To those scattered throughout the world who bear the name of D, within you there is that name, which you might consider a will inherited through the years. Can only pray that those at the mercy of this reason will be able to hear this message. Someone once said that the voices of the past will be heard. History is told by the winners, and the voices of the losers at the bottom of the sea are so very faint. But the truth that was gleaned at the cost of so much sacrifice has at last been told to the world just now. I can only pray that this message has made it safely out to the world at large. It would be foolish to hear about a 900-year war in the past from only one side. History requires a multifaceted approach to understand entirely. If only I had more time on my side. Alas, there are forces outside of my ability to stop. 25 years ago, the pirate Goldie Roger completed an unprecedented tour of the entire world, and what he and his crew heard were likely the purest voices of the past. In conclusion, I am sure you've all surmised by now, my view of the future is thus. One day, the memories of the Void Century will be recalled, and mark my words, that day is coming. The sinking of the world's continents was a man-made disaster, brought about by weapons. Weapons which, by someone's design, still exist today. The machinations of history and fate seem to insist upon the obliteration of those last descendants of fair races. If the world should come to pass, I want you all to take care of yourselves. No matter what should happen, I believe in the intelligence of mankind. I believe in science. Jur died 25 years ago. Whitebeard died 2 years ago. But the fall of these legends was merely the prologue of a new era. And now these people who refuse to buckle under any and all suppression, they are the ones who are the closest to the truth, ironically enough. Perhaps it was Roger who sent them there. The person who winds up with it may not be the one Joy Boy desired. There is no stopping the tide. The fate of the world now rests in the hands of the one who finds it, the person who lays claim to the One Piece. That is simply the truth. Joy Boy is his And with that, the Iron Giant unties the knot that Joy Boy tied for him so long ago and unleashes the strongest haki we have ever seen. Because of this, the enemy is knocked out and our crew and their friends are able to sail off away from Egghead when otherwise it seemed like it would have been impossible. This is when we launch into the flashback that shows us that Shaka, Pythagoras, and the Stella found out that York was behind everything and set into motion the plan to give this message to the world. Then they erased their memories so York couldn't find out that they knew. And with that, they made sure that the disaster that awaits just around the corner is none other than their ultimate triumph. And so, the Straw Hats and their comrades sail off into their next adventure in Elbaf. I hope you enjoyed this summary with Legos. I will have a review for the Egghead arc where I dig more into some of the key scenes and themes and what I thought of it overall, out for you soon. Please do chat with me more in the comments. I would love to hear what you thought of this arc. I'll see you again soon. Bye.